Hi guys, Julia here from JM Squared Vintage. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am here with something a little bit different. So the time has come, guys. Fashion Week has come and gone. I have spent hours and hours and hours watching runway shows, scrolling through street style photos, really trying to gather all of my thoughts on the trends that we are seeing coming up here in 2026. I mean, any excuse really to watch all the runway shows, right? That's fun for me. So today we are going to be breaking down the emerging trends that we saw at Fashion Week and breaking down some of the continuing trends from the last couple seasons. And hopefully this helps guide you as you are outsourcing to not just go after these bolo brands, but also maybe go after these style-based pieces that are going to fit into the active trends that are happening right now. But before we get started here, guys, if this is your first time here, if this is your first time stumbling on my channel, first and foremost, welcome. I am Julia. That is my name. We talk all things thrifting and vintage and the business of reselling on the internet here. If that sounds like something that you might be into, consider hitting subscribe down below. I would love to have you along on this journey. But without further ado, guys, we have so much to talk about. So why don't you go grab your notebook, grab yourself a snack, grab yourself a drink. You know I've got my matcha latte. So sit back, relax, and let's get into the trends. Before we get into all of the trends that we saw at Fashion Week, I want to take a quick minute to thank Vendu for sponsoring this video. Cross-listing is the single easiest way to increase your sales as a reseller. In my case, personally, when I started reselling clothing, I started my business over on Poshmark. So I tallied up my sales for the last 2 years. And when I started cross-listing, I saw my sales increase dramatically. Specifically, that increase was over 50%. I more than doubled my sales when I started cross-listing. The issue is cross-listing can be messy. Maintaining inventories in different marketplaces, making sure that when an item sells on one marketplace, it doesn't sell on another marketplace. It gets real messy real fast. And using Vendu has taken all of that stress off of the table. After I write my listing only one time, it only takes a few additional clicks to get it listed onto any of the marketplaces that they have linked. And they are linked to every marketplace you want to be on. Poshmark, eBay, Depop, Mercari, Whatnot, Etsy, Shopify, Vinted, and Vestiaire. And when I say it only takes a few additional clicks, I mean it. It literally only takes about 20 seconds additional on top of writing your listing to get it live on as many marketplaces as you want. And if you really want to streamline your process, you can take advantage of their AI tools, which will literally draft your descriptions for you to save even more time. And they have tons of features that help take the busy work and the stress off of your plate. For example, their auto delist feature detects sales on marketplaces and will automatically delist that item from all of the other marketplaces that you have it listed on without you having to even know that a sale went through. They also send auto offers. They even have a feature that will share your listings on Poshmark, refresh your listings over on Depop, or bump your listings over on Grailed. So it's really like having an assistant in your corner without having to pay a couple $1,000s in salary. So guys, if you are not cross-listing, I cannot recommend enough that you start. Even if this is a side hustle, if this is something that you do very part-time, at the end of the day, for 99.9% of the stuff that we sell, reselling is a numbers game, and cross-listing is how you win that game. So if you want to give Vendu a try, click the link in the description down below and take 25% off of your first month. I promise, once you do it, you will wonder why you haven't started sooner. Now, let's get into the trends. So when it comes to Fashion Week, you have to remember that the Fashion Week we're looking at as we go into spring is for the fall and the winter of this year, right? So a lot of the stuff that we're seeing on runways this season is fall and winter clothing, which is really something we should start sourcing midsummer anyway. So we are going to start first talking about some carryover trends, right? So we saw spring and summer runway back in October, and probably the two biggest stories that we saw on the runway that are going to be hitting very, very hard this spring and summer are sheers and lace. Now, sheer was still very present in the Fashion Week that we just saw, but it's not sheer in a floral chiffon kind of a way. It's almost exclusively monochromatic, and it's coming in two different formats, right? You're either going to get this kind of structured architectural sheer, or you're going to see this kind of layers and layers of diaphanous chiffon, right? But almost always monochromatic. So keep your eyes out for these sheer pieces. I've sold random sheer column skirts that had no tags. They might have been handmade, but they sold so quick because it very much fits into this kind of architectural sheer aesthetic. So keep your eyes out for sheers, both in the soft boho side and in the minimalist architectural side. But again, What we're really looking for here is mostly monochromatic, just one solid color. Floral sheers were really like nowhere to be seen in the last couple seasons. Lace was another huge story that we saw last fall, and again, it's really starting to ramp up. And it's not just lace trim, right? Like this version of lace that we're seeing is bringing lace out of the trim world, bringing it out of the notions world. So you're seeing a lot of lace in like unconventional applications. Lace pants, sheer lace pants, lace column skirts. Like Adidas had this really cool lace skirt that had like the 3 stripes, so it's this sporty look. Lace shirts, like all lace shirts, lace button downs, lace blazers. So lace in unconventional applications, still absolutely positively red hot. Keep your eyes out for lace and make sure you're using non-traditional lace and unconventional lace as keywords, because they seem to be pretty effective keywords, at least in my use cases. We're still seeing the trend of corsetry in tops, still very, very hot. I think that the corset movement is really going to be hitting kind of like peak adoption this summer. So I'm going to anticipate that we're going to start to see that decline after this summer. For now, it's still very, very in demand. You know, you always have to remind yourself that when you're watching Fashion Week and you're seeing these people walking the runway, you know, these are people that are, you know, trendsetters, right? It's going to be several years before a lot of these trends hit peak adoption, but staying on top of them allows us to kind of get in on these pieces before they're really being snatched up by the masses, wherever we source. And the other big carryover, again, that I think we're really starting to see peak in terms of popularity, in terms of mass adoption, is Y2K. And that is both vintage Y2K and reissue Y2K. So again, your silk, lace trim camis, I mean, those things fly out of closets. The kind of fairy core style dresses, the ultra low rise jeans, the micro mini skirts, the embroidery. So again, for Y2K stuff, if I'm following the trend curve right, I think we're in like peak mass adoption this summer. And just like the corsetry, I think we're going to see it start to decline maybe after like another fall with it. But for right now, it is like red, red hot. It's just getting much harder to find these pieces because, again, the masses are also kind of clamoring for them where we are outsourcing. But if you can get your hands on any pieces, or if you've got them hiding in your closet somewhere, now's the time to get those moved because they are in probably the peak of their demand right now. So next up, we're going to talk about the color and the print story that we saw happening this year. I'm trying to organize this in a way where we talk about these kind of like core components, and then we'll talk about the specific trends and kind of pull in these core components to see how they fit. But color story and print story is always really, really big. And while for spring and summer, we're still seeing a ton of pastels, that butter yellow is still really popular. You know, your icy blues, your icy pinks. We've really seen a shift away from those really dusty pastel colors. But bursting super duper hard onto the scene from Fashion Week this year is red. Not maroon, not burgundy, which is still very big and will still be a very in-demand color next year. Really the color of the season right now. I'm talking red, cherry red. It was everywhere. And the other part of that story is brown. And brown will continue to be really massive. Brown is really kind of starting its ascent this past winter, and it will be huge next year. Like if you take a look at the Ralph Lauren runway show, if you look at all the looks, they're all brown. Like head to toe monochromatic. There is some dimension in there. There's some like different prints, but like, you know, if you look at it from far away, it just looks all brown. As you are sourcing over the next couple months, start to focus in on reds and browns on top of the burgundy and like icy pastels that we've been seeing the last couple seasons. Now, in terms of prints, this was really interesting to me. There was not a ton of print at all. A lot of what I saw was monochromatic. So not just not printed, but like top and bottom and accessories all kind of the same color. Monochromatic stuff was really, really big, but there was very few florals. Really, the only florals that I saw happening were these like almost tapestry looking florals, super, super dark and muddy florals. I wouldn't even say moody florals. I'm talking muddy florals, like shades of brown kind of florals. But the two things that I did see peaking were animal prints. Now, there's always room in fashion for animal prints. And for many people, myself included, animal prints are a neutral. And truly they are, right? Like a leopard print is a neutral. It can kind of go with any color. But in particular, I was seeing zebra and leopard. Those two animal prints in particular were what I was seeing. And mostly I'm seeing them in skirts, jackets, and accessories. So not too much on the tops, not too much in dresses, but more as like an accent piece. So keep your eyes out for zebra and leopard because they were all over the place. All right, next we're going to talk about the silhouettes that we saw. Silhouettes are something that kind of form the basis for a lot of trend. And the two main themes that I saw were like a slimming of overall silhouettes. For the last, couple years, we've had a big focus on very baggy, oversized pants, oversized shirts, just, kind of the silhouettes that like swallow a person, where I'm seeing it be brought back in. We're not quite back at skinny jeans, although those still kind of fly under the radar, but more to the like stovepipe leg, the cigarette leg, right? So not big and baggy, not skin tight, but more like tailored, like a tailored slim straight. That is a lot of what we saw, at least running through the pants. And now in terms of jackets and topper pieces, you still see a lot of like volume, a lot of draping, but what we're starting to see come back in a little bit more of a statistically significant way are like nipped waists, almost into peplums. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But in general, when it came to silhouette, we saw those lines really start to like come in. There's still going to be that component of streetwear that has that big baggy vibe to it, but for most women's wear, we're starting to see those lines come back closer to the body. Now, next we're going to talk about accessories, and this is kind of a big category because accessories were everywhere. And probably the biggest accessory trend that I saw were these like huge kind of shield aviators. They were almost exclusively like a brown tortoise color, and the lenses were almost exclusively like a warm amber color. So keep your eyes out for stuff like that. But the second big story that I saw were brooches. Brooches were everywhere. They were on sporty things. They were on tailored things. They were on draped things. They were often like worn in multiples. And I think brooches, I feel like a lot of people who love vintage really love brooches. So this is your excuse to go hard at sourcing those vintage brooches. Get them out of the thrift store, get them out of the yard sale, and get them into the hands of people who love them. Because the brooches were everywhere. We are going to be seeing them everywhere in fashion, I think, for the next couple seasons. Another thing that I saw a lot of were gloves. Now, again, this is fall, winter, remember, so a lot of these things, aren't necessarily going to be hitting. But I always say gloves, especially vintage gloves, but like novelty gloves, lace gloves, leather gloves are some of my favorite things to source all the time. There's just always an underlying market for vintage gloves and statement gloves, regardless of trend. But they were huge this year, both being worn and being used as like accessories. You would see somebody with their gloves kind of artfully draped over their bag, right? Like people were using gloves as accessories, not in the worn on the hands kind of a way. It's very interesting, but I still say no matter what is happening in trend, you should be sourcing those vintage gloves because they are some of my fastest sellers, my most reliable sellers, and they take up like no space in storage. So something that has an always baseline, but is going to be peaking in the next year or so. We were continuing to see these kind of whimsical hats, these pillbox hats, these sailor hats. I'm interested to see how much they get picked up in mass adoption because they are kind of like out there, right? Like that's kind of an out there trend. But keep your eyes out for them. If you spot a random little sailor hat in the thrift store, if you spot a random little pillbox hat, pick it up, see how it does. But they were everywhere on fashion's trendsetters. So I'm watching this trend. I think if anything, we're in very early adopter space here, but I have been seeing them for a couple seasons now, so I'm interested to see if they really start to get picked up into like a mass production space. Belts continued to be a huge story this year. They were a huge story last October, and you're seeing these kind of big cinching belts. You're seeing belts with more of like a medallion style belt buckle or like a belt buckle style belt buckle, not necessarily seeing much in the sense of like a branded belt. Remember how like the Gucci double G belt was like everywhere with the Hermes belt and the Louis Vuitton belt. Not seeing much of that at all. It's more focused on like the leather and the detail of the buckle, right? You're seeing these like kind of big wide cinching belts over shirts. More on that in a second. If you're already having bad flashbacks, I'm with you. But we're also seeing like low slung belts, and we're seeing multiples. Some people wearing kind of like multiple belts over shirts as, again, like a statement. But belts continue to be a very big part of the accessory story this year. Finally, in terms of bags, I know a lot of you guys out there sell a lot of purses. Not something that I get into all that much, but we're still seeing the East-West bag kind of reigning supreme. We're starting to see barrel barrel bags kind of come back into vogue. And the thing that kind of piqued my interest most when it came to the bags was the kind of resurgence of a kiss lock bag. So you're both seeing these in like an oversized clutch application and used on regular like everyday purses, but kiss locks are making a comeback. So vintage purse lovers rejoice because our time is now. In terms of mass adoption right now, this is something that was like really big in Fashion Week a couple years ago, but is still very, very, very big right now. In terms of like everyday demand, hobo bags still huge. I'm seeing bucket bags starting to make a comeback. But yeah, east-west bags, barrel bags, bucket bags, kiss locks, and hobo bags. Those are the 5 bags that I would be sourcing above and beyond, like vintage Coach and stuff, which is still huge, huge, huge. Next up, we're going to break down the kind of 4 main trends that I saw at Fashion Week this year. And the first one we're going to talk about, which is the one that's going to be the splashiest and probably the most accessible for us as resellers, and that is indie sleaze. It's back, baby. We are starting to see Y2K kind of hit its peak. It'll probably start to decline a little bit over the next couple of years, and we're going to see the resurgence of indie sleaze. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this trend, this is kind of like the Kate Moss circa 2010, this kind of like post Y2K party girl era. Party girl meets rocker chic vibe. So in that era, you had kind of 2 main facets of fashion, right? You had twee, which is still kind of bubbling up there, still kind of bubbling up a little bit under the surface. So you had twee, which is like the Zooey Deschanel, very cute, very retro inspired, very whimsical. And then you had indie sleaze, which is like, I'm on a 3-day bender. I just spent $2,000 at Ledoux. There was always some manner of like smudged eyeliner, right? Like this was definitely like a rocker chick, party girl vibe. And Seven for All Mankind had their first runway. I don't know if they ever had runways back in like the early 2010s when they were really at their peak, but they did a show this season for the first time in at least a long time, if not the first time ever. And it was 2009. It was 2009 on that runway. There were a lot of like turquoise and magenta silks, lots of like micro mini dresses that were like worn over slim pants. Anybody else having flashbacks here? Lots of skinny scarves. Skinny scarves are back. But the general vibe of the indie sleeves that we saw was kind of like very soft and unstructured silhouettes, slimmer silhouettes for sure, but with lots of accessories and lots of like heavy metal accessories. The first thing that pops into my head when I think about like the indie sleaze era of fashion in particular is the Balenciaga city bag. And if you've ever had your hands on a city bag, most of them were like very thin, very worn feeling leather. So it's this kind of like unstructured bag with lots of things that are kind of hanging from it, but with heavy metal accents, right? Like they have studs and whatever. So I was seeing that a lot, both on the runway and in the street style around Fashion Week. So it's time to start digging into indie sleaze and keeping your eyes out for these pieces. So start keeping your eyes out for those monochromatic silk pieces, those super slim pants. Again, the capris were kind of everywhere. Statement necklaces, like big, kind of messy looking bags. There's a lot of people that'll say like twee is indie sleaze. And the thing about indie sleaze is there is a definitive component of sleaze to it, right? It's not just like this indie era that was big. Indie twee is indie twee. Indie sleaze is definitely taking the walk of shame. You know what I'm saying? So indie sleaze is back, guys. We're going to start seeing that climb up the ranks over the next couple of years. So keep your eyes out for those pieces before they get really hard to get your hands on. In stark contrast to indie sleaze, one of the other big stories that I saw was kind of an almost 80s inspired refinement to things. Again, not a ton of prints, not a ton of busyness in this year's Fashion Week, but what I did see a lot of was structure in particular. And the big story that I kept seeing were like structured shoulders, and not in the sharp structured shoulders that we saw like 10 years ago. These are more like rounded. Think more 80s inspired shoulders. Remember when you would get the shoulder pads that were so big that they basically kind of softened at the corners because they went so far out past your shoulders? That's the kind of shoulders that I've been seeing. So you're seeing a lot of big structured shoulders, One of the big things I kept seeing were funnel necks. I think we're going to see funnel necks a lot in both fashion and tailoring, and we're also going to see those a lot in like athleisure and loungewear. Make sure you're using that term. We really started to see like the mock necks creeping up over the last couple seasons, and now we're really at that full-blown funnel neck. They were everywhere this year. And that also ties in with that kind of nipped waist. So you would see these structured shoulders with nipped in waists. And again, a few flavors of peplums starting to creep their way in. And also with that, I saw a lot of pencil skirts. We are starting to see the resurgence of the pencil skirt. And these are the kind of things that I know you can find in any thrift store ever. I was literally just in a thrift store yesterday, and there was a section like this wide of J. Crew pencil skirts. They were all like a size 00, so I wasn't picking them up. But I'm like, man, if these were a size 10, I would grab them all right now, because pencil skirts were everywhere on the runway in street style. And I mean, those are the kind of things that are always going to be in style at a baseline. They are something that are, office appropriate. They look great on people. They do good things for people's silhouettes. But just like gloves, I think they're going to have their baseline popularity and they're going to have a little heightened demand. Double win if you can find like a leopard print or a zebra print pencil skirt. I think we're going to see a lot of demand on those over the next year or so. The next big movement that I saw was Retrosport. And Retrosport has really been bubbling over the last couple of years. I've talked about it quite a bit, but it was everywhere this year, and I think it's going to be huge this summer. In particular, two different classes of Retrosport. So you have the bloke core tracksuit half of Retrosport, which is one thing, and then the other half of Retrosport that I've been seeing quite a bit of is the kind of like 1980s excess moneyed Retrosport, right? So this is your rugbies, which have been big for a couple years. This is your like tennis sweatshirt. So keep your eyes out. I always like to think about Retrosport. Like there is going to be a ton of reissue type stuff. And there are certain brands that are like very in demand in terms of like this vibe, think like sporty and rich. But for me, when I'm looking for something retro sport, I'm looking for something that is true vintage, because I think that that is what's going to be the absolute gold standard in this world. Any of us can go to Target and pick up like a reissue tennis sweatshirt that's white and green and has all the vibes. But if you can find like a vintage Beverly Hills Tennis Club sweatshirt, like that's going to sell for $300-400. So while there are kind of reissue stuff that will get bread and butter prices, while there are more in-demand brands that are going to demand a higher price, I think that the absolute goal here when you're talking about retro sport is finding the true vintage pieces. So that's where I would be focusing my efforts on. But it's been growing the last couple of years, and I think it's going to be huge this summer, especially with this like JFK Jr., Carolyn Bessette thing coming out, like that kind of 80s, 90s yacht club, tennis club, polo club, all of these like really affluent sports. If you can find true vintage pieces from those sports, it's going to be money in the bank. So I want to quickly touch on utility, because this is something that we've been seeing bubbling up in fashion and in streetwear. This is something that has been very, very strong in demand for us resellers. And you see quite a bit of it in the street style around Fashion Week. It wasn't like a huge trend on the runway, but it is a huge trend that you guys should be keeping your eyes out for. And there's kind of two halves of it, right? So you have like the workwear half of utility, and then you have like the gorp core half of utility. And the common theme here being that these are purpose-built garments, right? So on the workwear side, you've got a lot of boiler suits, you've got Carhartt, you've got vintage Carhartt that continues to be incredibly in demand. You've got chore jackets. I literally just sold a fire retardant workwear jacket that was destroyed. I used the keyword thrashed in the listing, and it sold super duper quickly. So people are not only looking for like new crisp boiler suits and jackets, they are looking for pre-broken in, right? Like they don't want to put the 3 years of hard labor in to get that perfect patina on that Carhartt jacket. They'd rather pay $400 to buy one already broken in. And that's not an exaggeration. $300-400 for a broken in Carhartt is not anywhere close to outside of the realm of possibility. Like it just happened to me a month or two ago. On the other side of utility, you have gorp core, which is another trend that has been kind of bubbling up underneath the surface and still very, very big in streetwear. So that's going to be your technical pieces. You'll see a lot of like Arc'teryx, Solomon, trail shoes. Again, these are all pieces that are purpose-built for like hiking or skiing or whatever, but they're being worn in a streetwear fashion. So keep your eyes out for your gorp core side of utility and your workwear side of utility, especially if you live in a place that has a lot of like outdoor activity, Colorado, Utah, Montana, et cetera, or in a place that has a lot of like ranch work or a lot of like outdoor manual labor. You know, you might not see Celine pieces in your thrift store, but you are going to see Carhartt. You know, in Colorado, you are going to see Arc'teryx more than we're going to see that in Southern California. So this is a great way to like really harness where you are in this country. You know, I might have the designers, but you've got this stuff and it is as valuable, if not more valuable than the stuff that I can find here. So utility remains a huge trend in fashion. And we're going to wrap this up with what I'm kind of dubbing like a soft castle core. So with soft castle core, what I'm really doing is bringing in like the heritage piece and the castle core piece, and they're kind of marrying. I think that this is going to be a little bit of an easier way to do like a very high fashion look versus straight up castle core. Like there's not many people who can walk out with a big shoulder piece and like a corset and have it look kind of normal. You know, but you can do a subtly corseted piece with like a drape cloak over top, fasten it with some brooches. Those brooches come in heavy right here. That does look like a very accessible fashion piece. And we saw quite a bit of it. So while you're still having that corsetry, that kind of structure in the bodice that we saw a lot with castle core, you're seeing that paired with more like tailored trousers. You're seeing a lot of those, again, heritage fabrics, your Harris tweeds, your Glen plaids, your deep tartans. You're also seeing a lot of those like deep tapestry florals. But where we were seeing a lot more like structure warrior type stuff over the last couple years, now we're seeing a little bit more like draping softness to this. So we're seeing a little bit of this like soft castle core, which is still pulling in a lot of that like heritage tailoring, a lot of those old school fabrics. You know, you're seeing a lot of like focus on where the fabrics are from, you know, not necessarily the Loro Piana type fabric sourcing, but more like this came from this place in Scotland that has been making this tartan for, you know, 100 years. Like that's like the real flex. At this point, everybody knows who Loro Piana is, but not everybody knows been weaving that random tartan, right? Like that kind of knowledge and that kind of heritage is the flex, not even necessarily the label on the inside of the pieces. But that is it, guys. That is my roundup of the February Fashion Weeks 2026. I'm honestly surprised that I've been able to read my crazy notes, but I hope this helps you guys out. You know, obviously not everybody has access to high-end designer brands while they're outsourcing, but using these guidelines, you can really find pieces that are made by any designer or handmade, whatever, that fit into these aesthetics. So I hope this helps as you go forth and source through this spring, through this summer, as we're going into fall. Remember that the fashion week that we saw is fall winter, so we're going to see a lot of these pieces also hitting stores in the fall. This should get us well set up and well able to source ahead of the game, which is absolutely key as resellers. But let me know what trends are selling really well in your store. I'm interested to hear what everybody else is seeing kind of spiking in their stores. But guys, if you had fun, please consider leaving a like or a comment on this video. Of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. I would love to have you along on this journey. All of that helps me out so much with YouTube. And don't forget, if you want to give Vendoo a try, click the link down in the description box below and take 25% off of your first month. Thank you again to Vendoo for sponsoring this video. But without further ado, guys, I hope you have the most beautiful week. Happy hunting, and I will see you all in the next one.